Welcome back. My name is Felix Knight. This is my climate change game devlog part 4. So last week we made a paper prototype for the game that has, can't see here, but it has all of these cards that take players through some of the dialogue that I could just port directly to the game if it works well and edit it later. Things like that. So it's mostly a prototype around this dialogue system with branching paths, learning real statistics from the different characters about real life numbers that have to do with climate change, important facts and things like that. So in order to playtest this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it with my family. And I made this form. I forgot to record and show that, but it's pretty quick. It took me about 40 minutes to make this form. So some real important elements of a playtest form that I think are worth covering. Having a script when you start is good. It kind of relieves some of the tension of like explaining what's happening if you do it ahead of time, and then all you have to do is read off this. It makes you sound very professional. So you can give the player some context, like, here's what we're testing. Please give feedback at any time. If you want to leave at any time, you're more than welcome. And I also have options in here for if they would like to do the player surveys. So they actually don't have to. They're optional. If they said, no, I don't want to do the survey, I just want to play the game, it allows me to skip that portion of the form and still be able to get some data. But the test surveys, you can see, have some sliding number type questions. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how this one, for instance, is how much useful information do you feel you know about climate change? And this is a pre-test to get where the player is at before they start playing the game. And a 5 will be lots of information, 1 will be very little. You'll notice that these questions line up very directly with my measurable player action. So that is intentional. I wrote these things out sort of as those kind of playtest questions of like, does the game actually do these things? So this is a good outline basically for me of what I'm actually trying to get at. And the reason we do the pre-test and then I have a second part that will be for me to fill out, where I just have basically a notes block here where I can put in a paragraph long answer and record any feedback that they're telling me. And then when they're done playing the game, or when they decide to stop, say, do you want to take the final post-test survey? And they take this. So it has all of the same questions as the pre-test one, but also I think at least one more that's this one. Did playing the game provide you with useful information for discussing climate change? So we can get a glance at if there's difference in these questions, right? How much useful information do you know? And if they come in saying like a 1 or a 2, and they leave saying even a 3 or a 4, that's a clear increase of like, hey, I don't know a ton about this problem, but even just from talking to 3 characters, I know a fair bit more than I did before, right? And then how likely you are to initiate conversations, right? That's kind of that third measurable action of is this actually going to get people to go and talk to others about it and spread this message? That is really what is super vital here. And then how likely are you to go do more research? So that kind of gets into that utilizing the outside resources. I don't expect a bunch of change there because the game doesn't actually, this dialogue doesn't point to those outside resources. And whenever I implement it in the video game, I don't imagine, in-game characters being like, oh, I learned that our emissions, 30% of our emissions come from industry from this website, right? Chances are it'll just be they know that thing diegetically. It's just something that they have knowledge of. Hey, I've done my research. I know this thing. And then rather than calling out the source by name, that will be a little bit more on a meta level. So you might have the dialogue and then a little notification or some sort of, maybe a prompt right there would be a good choice. Like, hey, if you want to go look at this information right now, you can do it. And if not, we're going to save it to a log that you can kind of view in this game, but maybe there will be a separate page where you can just view all of the sources at any time, regardless of whether you've actually sort of encountered them in the world or not. But it'll just be more of like the character says this thing, and then, by the way, here's the actual source that informed that decision. They don't need to point that out in the game. The game can kind of handle that on a more meta level. That said, that sort of thing isn't in this prototype. It doesn't point to any outside sources. But even without that, if I get a little bit of this, like, hey, now I'm more interested in it, I think, yeah, I would be likely to actually just go search for more stuff and go find more of these statistics. Then I think we could project that it's probably likely that if we actually give them the resources that they need, that's even better, that we might have even better results there. Yeah, and then always give the player, the person who's filling out this form, do you have any other feedback, any further feedback, something like that. That's always good. Yeah, part of something I also wanted to talk about here is that with playtesting in DigiPen, generally in the earlier days, it was kind of like the instructors would have us show that we made like a printed form and that we did it on paper there. I think maybe for the players, seeing somebody like writing something down instead of taking notes on a laptop there might make them, if they can't see what you're doing on the laptop, right? Then they might assume that you're just like playing a game or something while they're trying to give you good information. Hang on. Discord thankfully has automatic streamer mode where it won't give you notifications if you're recording something, but Microsoft Teams does not. Teams notifications kept going off. But yeah, we'd have these paper playtest forms, and I guess, yeah, if the person's there, seeing you write something down is probably, they make more of an assumption that like, oh, that the person that's testing this with me is like actually paying attention to what I'm doing. Whereas if I'm just sitting behind a laptop, they might think that I'm like playing a game or something while they're and not actually, paying attention to what they're doing. That being said, I'm going to be playing this with my family, and I benefit from that bias, at least, of like, I can sit there with the laptop open beside them and not worry about them wondering if I'm just like screwing around, because they know I have good work ethic, right? And I'm also going to be using this kind of format whenever I start doing the digital playtests. So despite this being for a paper prototype, right, I'm trying to answer the same questions. I'm trying to get to the same goal with the video game. So I'm probably going to have similar questions on the sort of climate side, but I'll probably also do, testing to figure out, does the platforming feel good? Is it difficult to navigate where you need to go in the world? That's sort of more exploration type stuff that's not really embodied in the prototype, in the paper prototype. So yeah, that's the form. That is kind of how I would recommend it. Like with the paper versus digital, like this stuff, you can, there's obviously no responses here now, but I'll show you later. Once you get your stuff, it can show you even like a bar graph or a pie chart of what your responses look like to any of these questions. So it visualizes your data for you really, really easily. And in the old days of having all these paper things that people would give me, number one, I'm not super fast at writing things. I can type a lot faster, so that makes typing out feedback as people talk to me a lot easier. But also I'd end up having to convert all of that stuff to a digital format anyway. So this just completely skips that step, saves me a lot of time. If you're doing this kind of testing, I'm sure there are other tools out there for data collection and surveys and forms and stuff, but Google Forms is free and it's super duper easy, and even pros use Google Forms. So like, big AAA games and stuff use Google Forms for testing. So it is great. It works. It's very efficient for what it is. And it's definitely all that somebody like me needs. Somebody who's not like super extremely deep in the data or whatever. So I'm going to playtest this with my 4 folks. Once I've done that, I will, what's the word? Kind of figure out if the data indicates anything to me. Hey, do I need to make this change? What is or isn't working about this? We'll do that, and then we'll start making the product roadmap. I forgot to tape stuff for a while, and I got really, really busy on the night that I did all this stuff. But I play tested with all 4 of my family members in person, going through that paper prototype. It went pretty well. Like the playtest itself went well, and I wrote up a whole document about it and explained like my methodology, the script that I used before doing the survey, because having a script where you describe all the information that you need to, it just helps keep me on track, and it keeps results consistent. The pre-test and post-test results were not as like promising as I had hoped. So you can see when asked if people felt like they knew useful information about climate change, it didn't change after playing the game. Their answer to this question didn't change anyway. Likelihood to start a conversation about climate change also wasn't changed. Likelihood to search for information, thankfully, did change. It went up considerably, so I felt like chances are with this current prototype, for whatever reason, people might not feel quite ready to go out. Like they might not have enough knowledge, they might not be prepared to go have the conversations, but at least there was a significant increase in likelihood to go learn more information. So after doing that, they might feel more inclined to, go have those conversations if they feel more informed. And this kind of seemed to conflict with the original statement, but did playing the game provide you with useful information? And people said that it did. Only 4 testers, but still, four testers said that it did. So I gave some thoughts here, but I feel like potentially what's happening is they played it and then, felt like they got some information, but maybe they didn't really internalize it, and they didn't really like fully understand it, or felt like they learned it in a way that's going to stick with them in the long term. And that might be why that answer for that first question didn't change. Like, yes, I learned some new things, or climate change as a topic is so large that they feel like even if they learned some useful stuff, it wasn't so significant that they're like now better informed. So, yeah, but there were at least a couple of those helpful things. And so I kind of, for all of these, what I'm going to do, because I'm going to be playtesting this every week as a big chunk of my time, you'll see, and talking about the results and stuff. I might not go in this depth in the video every time, but to give you a sense of kind of what I'm doing here, I describe each of the questions, what their results indicate to me, a bunch of my notes from doing usability. So whenever we're playing the game, I have them do the pre-test and the post-test, and I don't watch, I don't see, I don't know what people's answers are until I look at it at the end. But while they play the game, I take notes about the things that they say or that they do, or try to get stuff on like body language. The paper prototype is more difficult, especially because I was playing with them. So trying to sort of like run the game and get notes at the same time. I couldn't go quite that deep, but I still got a lot of useful information out of it. Which conversations people responded well to, which ones they didn't. Funny enough, the one with the food truck delivery guy that's kind of, I'm trying to think of the word for it, but he's not very open to migrants coming into his town. That conversation was one where people seemed to have a pretty strong reaction to him, like, this guy sucks, and I dislike him, and I'm going to explain why he's wrong. But then, whenever they had that conversation, he was like, yeah, I can see where you're coming from, and I get that, and I have, my perspective on it has changed a little bit. Even though it's a short conversation, it's kind of contrived, people still seem to be, like, content with that. Like, yeah, the guy's probably, overall, there's a good person somewhere inside there, but he's got this layered up ideology that we need to work on. But there's some good in there somewhere. And I think that felt satisfying to players. It seemed, people were like, okay, after finishing that conversation. So they seemed to be happy with it. Some of the other ones weren't quite as effective. One player told me a lot about, like, with the character that you're trying to convince to eat a more plant-rich diet, they're like, if you talk more about the individual health benefits, they thought that players would respond better to that, which I agree with. So, and I think that opened my eyes to, like, all of the solutions in the game. If I can kind of target them toward how could this benefit you on a personal level? Because a lot of them can. A lot of them are things like, hey, this wouldn't just make the planet a better place for all of us, but it would actually usually has some benefits for you in the short term too, like with the plant-rich diets. Better for your health, generally cheaper. So those kind of things. And then kind of a list of, like, what I'm going to change about either my testing process or the game, or, like, what I plan to do with the game based on the data that I accumulated. So I'll have this every week, and it'll be a good thing for me to be able to know, here's what I want to change. Now let's get into the roadmap. So a roadmap, if you're not familiar with this idea, is basically a big overview, like, here are the big strokes for what I'm going to do each week. So before I go through the actual roadmap, I'll show you. I made a whole task list. I prioritize things into must, should, could. So obviously in a week, you really have to get through all of your musts, or if that's like a feature or something, if you don't get through it within that sprint, generally it's like, that's not work that you ship with the game. You don't keep extending out your musts. They have a fixed time where you have to do them, and if you complete them, they're good to go. You're good. You can work on your shoulds and coulds and improve the product, but the musts are like, you really, really want to try to nail this thing every week or every sprint. But my sprints are going to be a week long because the project is short and I'm one person. So yeah. And this includes everything. This is playtesting, all of the miscellaneous stuff that I have to do. Like at the end of Hyperham, I had to make the trailer and the game gallery submission and stuff like that. That's all there. Basically every piece of the game from start to finish. And I tried to get pretty in depth here with, like, here are most of the, like, different assets that I need for the world, for the different locations that I came up with, music, all of the different buttons that need to be on the menus in order to fulfill the game gallery requirements, and my own sort of standards of, I don't even know if, like, you're required to have volume sliders or a resolution for the game gallery, but if I don't have that, it, like, drives me insane and it makes doing a trailer difficult. So those are, like, the things that I know I have to include. And getting into the actual roadmap itself, you can see I have every single week how much time I expect each of these things to take me. And these are kind of chunked a little bit more than that full task list that you just saw. So it's like, write dialogue for 3 characters, right? Implement 3 of those characters, put them out in the world, do the terrain sculpting and stuff like that. Given how much time I think I need to spend each week doing playtesting and revisions to really show on my portfolio, like, hey, I actually do my due diligence and I do a good job at testing and I do this rigorously and I make improvements to the game that actually have a measurable impact. To be able to accumulate enough data to show that, I have to spend a considerable amount of my time. So I'm thinking about 3 hours each week, which is about a third of my time, is a must for playtesting, writing a report for it, which helps me figure out these are the exact steps that I need to go through, like I showed you on the other playtest report, and then actually doing some edits. Because I can't really know in advance what is going to work well or what's not going to work well and what I'm going to need to change. This is just an overall time box of, like, here's, you have an hour basically each week to, if you find stuff in the playtest that you need to fix, then you have an hour to fix it. If there's some huge issue that's a very glaring thing that's going to take a lot of hours, then it might end up, I might need to restructure things a little bit more, but I don't think that's likely to happen, just because my 2 main mechanics, which are the things that if they broke would actually set me back a really long time, are platforming, which I've done a lot of times and is easy, formulaic, and the dialogue system, which I didn't get as good of results on that first pass as I wanted, but I got some promising results, and I have some ideas for what I'm going to do in order to fix that. So yeah, 3-hour time box pretty much every single week to do that playtest stuff, and then some hours each week for musts to implement stuff. Like in the first few weeks, I'm trying to just get all my features done, so it's going to be the player controller, the dialogue system, my terrain, stuff like that, HUD. And then the few weeks after that is content, so my character's dialogue, the level design, that kind of deal. And then the very last few weeks are all the menus and stuff, basically, since at that point, menus are kind of generic. It's not like I'm going to get a bunch of playtest data that's like, your menus don't feel good or whatever. It's just like you click buttons and it happens. So it's an okay thing to push off to the end. Yeah, and you can see like even color coding the shoulds and coulds in here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coulds. Very, very, very little room in this schedule to add a lot of the extra stuff that I wanted. And even with this musts list, this only gets me 3 characters. So I'm only really like banking on shipping the game with 3 characters. In my shoulds, if I got all of my shoulds done, that includes 9 more characters, something like that, maybe 10 more characters. So I have enough time where if things take me about as long as I have estimated them to, which I've done this kind of stuff a bunch of times, my estimates are pretty accurate at this point. My estimates for how long it takes to implement features and content and stuff, I should be good to get in quite a few more characters. But in like a worst case scenario, the game would ship with only 3 characters, and honestly, it would still work all right. And it would at least show like, hey, even though there's not a whole lot here, all the systems and stuff are there. It's just a matter of creating content for it, right? So it has a small sample of content, but I can explain in my portfolio, like, took this amount of time to develop all the features, takes this amount of time to do dialogue and stuff like that. If I had 20 more hours, I could implement these characters, right? It's flexible kind of base system to expand upon. And that's pretty much what I'm going to follow. So every week, whenever I plan out my tasks, look at this roadmap and say, okay, 3 hours for movement. How am I going to break that down? This week, I think it's maybe an hour to just get a character running and then a couple of hours to get in animations for them. That might even be a little bit of an underestimate, because I think what I'm going to have to do is to get visual consistency across both the player character and those NPCs. I'm going to have to find like some sort of set of models or customizable models or something like that, so that I don't end up using like a weird looking character model or a specific looking character model, and then whenever I get to, in a few weeks after that, sourcing characters for the NPCs, they don't come from different asset packs, they don't look vastly different, right? If your character is like a very realistic looking human or whatever, and then you walk up to the NPCs and they're like little low poly people, that's gonna look weird. It's not gonna be right. So if I had to, I could do that and just say, I'm not an artist, I just had to get stuff for free from the asset store. But I want to try not to do that. Yeah, so that was it for this week. I'm 15 minutes away from doing my meeting where I'm going to start, developing the game, which you'll get the video for that next week. But like I said, I was running a little bit late. So that was it. It was the roadmap. It was the research thing. So the coming video, you're going to see me start building the game, actually, which is going to be fun. So this stuff here, third-person movement, getting some music into the game, and ideally starting to create some of the props that are going to be in the world if I have some extra time. That's what we're getting into. So thanks. I'll see you then.